If you've ever been in a room full of people nodding along and felt a strange, almost magnetic pull to say, but wait, have you considered the opposite? You already know the look, the slow blink, the slight eye roll, the label that follows you everywhere. Difficult. Negative? A contrarian? A devil's advocate? Maybe it happened in a team meeting when everyone agreed on a plan and you were the one voice asking, but what if this goes wrong? Or at dinner when your friends were excited about something and you instinctively started poking holes in it. Not to be cruel, not to ruin the moment, you just couldn't help it. Society has a word for people like you: argumentative, pessimistic, a buzzkill. And you've probably internalized that label so deeply that you've started apologizing for how your brain works. But here is what nobody tells you. What you're doing isn't negativity. Psychology has a name for it, and it turns out it may be one of the rarest and most valuable cognitive traits a person can have. Before we break down why your contrarian instinct is actually a superpower, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Let's get into it. First, we need to talk about the lie. For most of your life, you were told that the ideal thinker is a consensus builder, someone who listens, aligns, and moves forward with the group. Conflict avoidance was disguised as emotional maturity. Agreement was mistaken for intelligence. Going along to get along was rebranded as being a team player. And if you constantly pushed back, questioned the narrative, poked at ideas that everyone else seemed comfortable with, you were seen as the problem, not the solution. But here's what that model gets catastrophically wrong. Consensus, left unchecked, produces groupthink, and groupthink has caused some of the worst disasters in human history. The 2008 financial crisis happened because entire rooms of brilliant analysts nodded along to models that were fundamentally broken. Not because they didn't have doubts, but because the social cost of voicing them felt too high. The Enron collapse, the Boeing 737 MAX failures, in almost every catastrophic institutional failure you study, you find the same thing buried in the postmortem. Someone knew. Someone had doubts. And nobody asked the one question that could have stopped it. The person brave enough to ask that question isn't the problem. They are the only thing standing between a bad plan and a disaster. So, why do some people have this wiring while others don't? Psychology points to something called need for cognition, the intrinsic motivation to think deeply, engage with complexity, and resist accepting easy answers. People with high need for cognition don't just process information, they interrogate it. Studies show that people high in need for cognition are more resistant to propaganda, more accurate in their assessments under pressure, and more likely to catch logical errors that others miss. They're not being negative. Their brain is running a background program that most people's brains simply don't run: active disconfirmation. They're constantly asking, what would have to be true for this to be wrong? There's also a neurological angle. Research on the default mode network, the brain's internal monologue system, shows that highly contrarian thinkers show more activity in regions associated with perspective-taking and counterfactual simulation. In plain terms, your brain is literally running alternate simulations of reality in the background while everyone else is accepting the first one presented. That's not obstruction, that's advanced cognitive modeling. Think of most people's thinking like a straight line. Input comes in, they process it, they accept it, they act on it. Clean? Yes. Efficient? Maybe. But it's also extremely vulnerable to manipulation, bias, and blind spots. Your thinking is more like a C shape. You take in the information, but then you curve around to look at it from behind. You examine what's missing, what's assumed, what's being taken for granted, and what the failure modes might be. You don't just receive the narrative, you pressure test it. This is called dialectical thinking, the ability to hold two opposing ideas simultaneously and extract truth from the tension between them. It's the cognitive foundation of philosophy, legal reasoning, scientific peer review, and great journalism. Every system humanity has built to protect itself from catastrophic error runs on dialectical thinking, and you do it naturally. But here's the trap. The C shape only works if you're applying it with intellectual honesty, not just as a reflex or a social defense mechanism. There's a difference between genuine contrarian thinking and contrarianism as a personality shield. One serves the truth, the other serves the ego. Here's what happens when the C-shaped mind spends years being told to straighten out. You develop a habit of self-censorship. You hold back the challenge, stay quiet, and let the bad idea move forward. And then one of two things happens. Either you watch it fail exactly the way you predicted, which doesn't feel like vindication, it feels like grief, because you could see it coming and nobody listened. Or something worse happens. You start to believe the criticism. You start thinking, maybe they're right. Maybe my brain really is broken, wired for conflict, too negative to function. This is a genuine psychological harm. Research on cognitive suppression shows that when people consistently stifle their natural thinking style, it generates a specific kind of cognitive dissonance that corrodes confidence over time. You stop trusting your own instincts. You start second-guessing the very signal that makes you valuable. The worst part isn't even the silencing. It's the slow accumulation of it. Year after year of swallowing the concern, of watching decisions get made that you already knew were flawed, of being thanked for your input and then completely overruled. That builds something, not bitterness, something quieter and more dangerous, a habit of preemptive surrender. You stop raising the challenge before anyone even gets the chance to dismiss it. And that is the real loss, not yours, everyone's. Understanding your contrarian mind is relieving, but understanding it doesn't automatically solve the friction it creates in real life. Because here's the hard truth. Raw contrarianism without structure is just noise. It makes you exhausting to work with, even when you're right. The goal isn't to stop questioning, it's to become a precision instrument instead of a wrecking ball. The most effective contrarian thinkers in history, Socrates, Richard Feynman, Christopher Hitchens, and Steve Jobs, didn't just challenge everything randomly. They practiced what we might call serial questioning. They chose their battles, built their challenges on evidence, and framed their opposition in a way that invited others into the discomfort rather than shutting them out of it. Think about how Feynman approached the Challenger investigation. He didn't storm into the hearing and declare everyone wrong. He dropped a piece of O-ring material in a glass of ice water in front of the cameras and let reality make his argument for him. No speeches, no ego. He channeled his contrarian clarity into the most elegant, undeniable demonstration possible. That's the C-shaped mind operating at its highest level. There was a product manager who had spent nearly a decade being told her instinct to question launches was slowing the team down. She was 3 weeks away from leaving tech entirely. Then she landed on a team that ran a formal pre-mortem before every launch, a structured session where someone was explicitly tasked with imagining the failure before it happened. She became the person who ran it. She went from being seen as the obstacle to being called the most valuable person on the floor. The instinct never changed. The container for it did. One structured voice of dissent, not random negativity, but intentional, focused questioning, saves lives. Give the instinct a structure, and it stops being friction. It becomes the most reliable thing in the room. There's one final layer to this. Evolutionary psychology. Human tribes survived not just because of their cooperators, but because of their skeptics. Every group needed someone whose nervous system was tuned to detect when the plan was wrong, when the leader was lying, when the consensus had become dangerous. That person was not popular at the fire, but they were the reason the tribe didn't walk off a cliff. In an environment where information moves faster than ever, where AI can generate convincing falsehoods at scale,
The person who instinctively asks, "But is this actually true?" is not an obstacle. They are essential infrastructure. Think about what the last decade alone has shown us. Social platforms engineered for engagement that nobody publicly challenged until the data was catastrophic. Financial products so complex that the analysts couldn't explain them, but nobody wanted to be the one to say so out loud. Corporate cultures that drove themselves into the ground because the person at the top surrounded themselves only with people who agreed. In every one of those stories, the contrarian thinker wasn't the problem. They were the early warning system that got ignored. Your contrarian instinct is not a social defect. It's a cognitive immune system. And in a world increasingly vulnerable to misinformation and intellectual monocultures, it may be one of the rarest and most necessary traits a person can have. So here is what I want you to hear clearly. You were never broken. You were never too much. You were never the problem in the room. You were the answer to a question the room didn't know it was asking. The question you couldn't stop yourself from asking, the one that made people shift in their seats, the one you apologize for 100 times, that question has changed companies. That question has stopped disasters before they started. That question is the foundation of every breakthrough that ever looked, at first, like someone being difficult. If this video finally put language to something you felt your whole life, drop a comment and tell me, what's the moment you got in trouble for asking the wrong question at exactly the right time? I want to read every single one. If this resonates, subscribe, because this channel exists for exactly the kind of person this video is about. You weren't born to nod along. You are built to be the one voice in the room that keeps everyone else honest. The world has always needed that voice. It just forgot to tell you that the voice was yours.